So welcome to INWED Talks, which is an initiative of the Women's Engineering Society that celebrates International Women in Engineering Day. INWED is the Women's Engineering Society's flagship global campaign that highlights and creates a sense of belonging through achievements, contributions, and the impact of women engineers, whilst inspiring future generations of women to pursue engineering careers. These INWED talks are a series of conversations in exploring the INWED 25 theme of Together We Engineer through various lenses. And this INWED talk focuses on crafting fulfilling careers in engineering. And to do this, I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Skinner, who's Exec Director for Responsible Business and Government Relations at WSP and patron here at the Women's Engineering Society, and Becky Ravel, Test and Validation Engineer at YASA and Early Careers Board Member here at the Women's Engineering Society. Thank you both for agreeing to record one of these talks. By bringing you two together at perhaps two different career journey points, we hope to spark a meaningful conversation around equity in engineering and career development, reinforcing the importance of supporting diverse talent and strengthening professional opportunities for women in engineering. So let's dive in. It'd be really great if you could introduce yourselves briefly, and Becky, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah. So as Susan said, I'm a test and validation engineer at YASA, which is a company that makes electric motors for high performance electric vehicles in the automotive industry. My background is mainly in automotive and Formula One, and I've been on the Early Careers Board at WES for the last 3 years, mainly working on the events team and the podcast team.
Amazing. So you'll be well skilled at this. Rachel, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, Susan, for inviting me to join in with this, first of all. So as you just said, I am an executive director at WSP, so one of the half dozen or so large engineering and environmental consultancies. The role I have now is the one that you just mentioned, to do with government relations and ESG and similar responsible business. But prior to that, I used to run our transport business, in particular the transport planning side of things. So that's sort of my technical background, if that makes sense. As you mentioned, I've just recently become a patron of WES. I'm also a patron of Women in Transport. And actually, it's such an exciting week this week for women in engineering, because we've just had our 20th birthday party this week as well, which is a slight moment in terms of making me feel quite old, but never mind, there we go. So I guess one other thing just to mention by way of very brief intro is that probably one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of my career so far is that I became president of the Institution of Civil Engineers at the end of 2020, so the depths of COVID, and I am the youngest person ever to have done that role, and that is something which is a constant source of real pride to me. So I talked a lot about climate action, and we'll be coming back to that topic, I'm quite sure, in just a minute.
It's fantastic, and well done, Rachel, and such a great role model for women coming up behind you, and for your peers, I'm sure. So I want to come to you first, Rachel, and just talk a little bit about the role you're in now, specifically around what you've learned from early career engineers that you have in your team that perhaps you've been working with recently. What have you learned from them that's really shaped your leadership style?
I love this question. In my head, I'm still one of the young engineers, right? It's just in reality a bit of time has gone by. Never mind. I know. We're all still 21. Anyway, where I guess I immediately go when you ask me a question like that is, to me, it's genuinely the curiosity, the interest, the passion of young engineers of all different, of all different technical specialisms and so on, and indeed young professionals who might not actually be technically engineers but are part of the engineering community. Seeing that in practice out there just spurs me on constantly. The energy, the engagement, the potential, really, in terms of everybody understanding that what they really, really want to do is make the world a better place in their own unique way, which is just, it's the one thing I think that joins us all together. So that passion just gives me constant energy and hope, and kind of spurs me on, as I say, in terms of where I want to go and how I want to shape things and so on. So in terms of how that's changed the way that I go about, I guess, my everyday work and effort and engagement and so on, I think there's a real place for, in a world of technical professionals, just trying to speak in plain English and be friendly, and to listen to everybody, including the young engineers out there, because actually the way that the different generations lay out the problems, the way they use language to explain what they perceive to be the biggest issues, that if we all did that a lot more and just listen to each other, we could all be much more relevant. And I think we'd go a long way in terms of making the industry more attractive, more relevant, more visible, all these really critical things that we need to do in amongst everything else we're trying to do as well.
No, that's such a good point. And I just want to say at the top of this talk, Rachel, I don't want to make you feel like you're ancient. There is a danger that we might do that. We've invited you along because of your seniority, not because of your age. So just put that out there. So that's really good. And I think something that'd be interesting to hear your point of view, Becky. That what have you learned from the other side, from those amazing, well, I guess some of the good and maybe some of the ones you haven't really enjoyed working for, leaders over the course of your career so far? What have you learned from those experienced leaders that's really influenced your approach to career development?
I think the main lesson I've really taken from like mentors I've had or senior engineers that I've worked with is to say yes to all the opportunities that you can and gain all the experience that you can, even if sometimes you don't feel like you're confident enough or you have the experience to do so. I think it's led me to like have interviews for jobs I never thought I would have, even if I didn't get the role, and also to apply for my current job. I never thought it would be something I would have the experience for, but I think that was probably like the most valuable lesson that I've learned so far.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and maybe we can just build on that a little bit, Becky, to talk around how you've navigated your engineering journey, and in doing that, in creating your development plan, what challenges do you think have been the most prominent as you've tried to develop your early career, that you feel maybe senior leaders have had difficulty in understanding? What challenges have you come across in your professional?
I think a lot of it has been around like maybe like feeling the imposter syndrome and like confidence, especially maybe, I mean, most of the senior engineers I've worked with are male, so it probably applies more to them, but like feeling like you have a voice within a very male dominated industry, I think has been one of the main challenges. But having like joined the early careers board and talked to like the other female engineers there, I think that's helped me to like gain confidence, and also like having one of my mentors is a senior female engineer, and being able to talk to her about things has really helped.
Yeah, Rachel, I don't know if you want to come in there. I mean, I've got quite strong views around imposter syndrome, and whether it's a sort of construct that kind of perpetuates a bit of a limiting self-belief within women. But I want to hear what you think about that, because it can be quite a controversial topic.
I think, I have quite strong views on this whole thing around imposter syndrome, actually. I think one of the best bits of advice that I was given by somebody quite a long time ago now was actually to stop and realise that genuinely everybody feels that way. And it doesn't really matter if you're at a very junior part of your career, or if you're rising up through, or if you've become somebody in quite a senior role. There is always a thing that happens that still makes you feel a little bit that way. And it's funny, it's almost advice I now give to my kids. I've got 3 teenagers, and I sort of find myself asking myself, we'll come on to that in a sec as well. There's another challenge anyway. No, just asking myself, well, seriously, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And the answer often is not a lot. You know, unless you really do something drastically embarrassing, but it's pretty unlikely. You know, you kind of go to just go for it and sort of put aside those fears, swallow it down a bit, and sort of almost try. I know it's really hard, it's easy to say, hard to do, but swallow it down and try and turn it almost to a sense of excitement about the potential. And maybe, as you were just saying, you know, treat everything as an opportunity, and you just don't know, do you, where things are going to lead. So it's normal. It's totally normal to feel that way. And I honestly don't mind saying out loud that I still feel that way quite a few days of most weeks.
I think that's quite natural, isn't it? I think when you're going into a new role, you shouldn't know everything straight away. You know, that's part of the growing as part of your career, isn't it? You know, that you come in and there are new things that you're learning, new challenges, or that sometimes you turn up to work and, you know, you're not feeling tip top. I always say about imposter syndrome, there are people who are who feel like they perhaps need to do extra work, and I think, you know, the research shows that women typically sort of do all the extra prep because they're conscious that they have a bit of a gap. And someone else said to me, and one of my senior leaders said to me once, oh, everyone's got imposter syndrome. But I think there are cases where some people are genuinely imposters. And they don't have the syndrome, but they also don't know that they can do it, but they're overconfident. So I think we should remember that as well. So look out for those people. So Rachel, I'm going to come back to you, and you know, you mentioned that you were the youngest president of the ICE. What, maybe looking at that, maybe not, but what was the most unexpected challenge that you've had in your career? And perhaps you can share a bit about how you overcame it.
Sure. I always find this a really difficult question to answer, if I'm honest, because you can kind of think of so many things, and then at the same time, it's almost like nothing is quite significant enough almost to mention, if that makes sense. Actually, I will stick with where you started from there for a moment in terms of the ICE role and so on. Actually, it was more of a point of confusion rather than a point of challenge, but I think you could see it both ways. I will never forget at the start of my year as ICE president, where I essentially felt I was being told off by some of the much more senior members of that civil engineering community, because I said to camera, on record, very early on, everything was on camera because it was COVID, right? So there was no option. I didn't get to see any real people, but never mind. That's the reality of it that year. But I said out loud quite a lot of times that my inspiration in terms of picking a theme around climate action for that year and really trying to swing, you know, the civil engineering community into really thinking about what to do about that, I was inspired by the next generation and seeing what was coming and the need to just get on with changing stuff now and not keeping on waiting for something else to happen. I, as I say, felt like I was being told off, told that I was wrong, not to be inspired by the sort of greats of the engineering past. And, you know, why wasn't I, when somebody asked me that question, why wasn't I, you know, describing how I was inspired by, with respect, people who would now be sort of 250 or 300 years old if they were still alive today, and you know, what, it's almost as if I was suggesting I didn't respect that expertise and all the rest of it. And of course, what I was actually trying to say was almost the opposite. It was like, given where we are, given where we've come from, given all that stuff, I now see that we need to look at it differently. And I found that it was very difficult to process in terms of joining together those two different thoughts. I was genuinely confused why people would react like that. It's like, well, why on earth wouldn't you be inspired by your kids and the next generation? It doesn't make any sense to me that you wouldn't. But it felt like it was a very alien thought. So that actually was genuinely quite a difficult thing to kind of work around and to find a way to connect in both directions, sort of upwards and downwards within the industry, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Why would they assume you're not respecting?
Because my first answer was not to name check you know, the appropriate people. My answer was to talk about you know, about my children, because the reason I absolutely anchored on that theme in that moment was to do with my now terrifyingly nearly 18-year-old coming home from school when she was 11 or 12 in tears because one of her classmates had told her about climate change.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a natural thing. But there we go. So no, that is an interesting, I think, point of constant kind of technical challenge. If I can have one more while I'm
Yes, do
chattering
it.
on, in terms of other things that obviously are, challenges, and maybe not an unexpected challenge, but I cannot even begin to count the number of times where people through my career, especially men, if I'm honest, actually look at me and say, I don't know how you do it. Don't know how you do it. How have you got 3 kids and a responsible job, and you're so engaged in all this stuff, you do all this work out in the industry, a lot of it at slightly antisocial times and all the rest of it, and you put all this sort of energy and passion into different things. How on earth do you do it? And I also found that actually a really difficult question to answer, because on the one hand I was thinking, well, are you saying that you don't think I'm coping? Or are you simply asking because you're interested and you don't quite get it? And the answer actually, of course, honestly, is that I don't really know how all those things fit together either, but they just somehow do. Which is a really honest answer, right? I mean, yes, so I've got 3 teenagers now, so we've had, many years of having to deal with the challenges of tiny people up to now, in one case, somebody who's taller than me, but there we go. But then also now I feel like I've also got the new challenge coming into the frame of actually having 3 very elderly people in my life, my new elderly children who are coming into the frame and needing more and more help. And so it's another phase of, I don't know how you do it. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not quite sure either how I'm going to do it. It's going to be a massive challenge, but it'll be okay. It'll be okay. A bit of flexibility, a bit of wiggle room, it'll fit.
And a curious question for someone who's worked in engineering, to sort of suggest that you wouldn't be able to problem solve.
Absolutely right.
Which feels like a basic ask for anyone working in engineering.
Yeah.
Becky, were you going to come in there?
No.
That's fine.
I think it is quite inspirational how you managed to fit all of that in, because it is quite a lot. I think I really enjoy doing the women's engineering stuff, but it can be hard after like you've done a day of work and then you come home and it's more like enjoyable work to do, but it's a lot to fit in. So I'm just in awe of how you manage that, as well as having 3 children.
Well, maybe I've been very lucky with the 3 children, and also you have to sort of set up life, I always think, in a way that it does work for you, and the same solution doesn't work for everybody. So in my case, I'm fortunate my husband's a teacher, so one thing we know about is the rhythm of term time and holiday time, and the fact that his commute is the school run. I mean, that is how I can go and do a full-time job that pulls me around in various different places and so on. So it's interesting, isn't it? But you talk to other people and they've got very different solutions, and it is a constant juggle. But then I always stop and think I wouldn't have it any other way, genuinely.
Yeah. I think as well, like the work outside of work can be so like rewarding and inspiring, like talking to like other women engineers who have done
Absolutely.
Lots of really cool things.
They're friends, right? They become friends.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant.
I think when I joined the early careers board, I was really excited about all the work I got to do, and I had no idea I'd end up being really close friends with a lot of them. So
nice to hear. So nice to hear. And I think that other point around having parallel streams in your working life, whether it's professional and voluntary, which you've both done, really, for me, is that path to resilience. So it is more work, but I think when inevitably one of them's having a bit of a low, you can lean into the other to bring you up. And I think you've just described that beautifully, Becky. So I think it is, and the whole thing about cross-fertilizing capabilities that you'll develop in one and take to the other, I think is really valuable. So that's good. I just want to come on to think, and maybe you can start us off on this, Becky. How do you think, what do you think senior leaders in engineering can be doing to support better pathways for early career professionals, maybe drawing on your own experience or that of your peers? What could they be doing to sort of facilitate having these fulfilling careers for people, in the first few years of their engineering career?
I think Rachel mentioned it earlier, but about like really listening to each other, like when talking to senior engineers and about the problems that we're facing, and maybe I find it really helpful to talk to them, like whether they've dealt with that problem or something similar, and because they just have like different ways to problem solve things. And I think mentorship is really powerful in that as well. I think that really helps to, I think we'll come onto it later, but like to talk about like career goals and how to kind of move forward with things.
And that's one way of engaging, talking about how the sort of, senior leadership can engage with the early careers engineers, and mentoring is one of those ways to engage. And obviously you can do reverse mentorship as well. Rachel, maybe you can come in here and how can these two sort of seemingly disparate groups engage better to bring more value to the workplace?
To me, the obvious place to start is exactly where we were just going in terms of the conversation. It is just about talking to each other, hearing each other and understanding things. And I guess just playing back to that, the last few minutes of conversation, really recognizing that if we genuinely want to build a more diverse community of engineers that better reflects society out there and is better able to solve all these big problems and all the rest of it, which I think we can all agree that's what we're trying to do, it's going to have to be around being more flexible and having more trust in people at all different stages of their career. I think that the trust angle is really important as well. Let people organize the way they want to work, and that work-life balance and thing and everything else in a way that works for them, and trust that that is the way to get the best from them, rather than dictating too much and that kind of thing. So I think otherwise you end up cutting people out and making it very difficult to participate. I suppose think in overall terms, in terms of what the more senior communities of engineers could do to create better pathways. We know that the needs of engineering, the demand for different types of engineering and so on, it shifts and changes all the time, right? With technological shifts, with societal shifts, everything else that's going on. Don't we need to get a lot better at helping people to move around the industry in a much more open way? We are very blinkered at times in terms of saying, well, if you've never been a whatever type of engineer, you never can be. And you just think, well, hang on a minute.
So much of that goes on, doesn't it? Sorry, Becky.
It's okay. I think as well, like being more, I think the industry would benefit from being more open to people that have come in from like a non-standard route, like if they've done a different degree subject or they've just got experience in something else but with transferable skills. I think I switched what I wanted to do when I was doing my A-levels, so I had to do like a foundation year and then my bachelor's and master's. But I think at times I definitely felt like that was a disadvantage, that I was just like behind other people and I took longer to get to where I wanted to be. But actually the skills I gained from like doing those different A-levels and then making that big decision, I think have really benefited me in my career quite a lot. But it took me quite a long time to see that, like the advantages of it, because I think everyone else has kind of done the same
Rachel,
thing.
You can talk to that, can't you?
I'm sure smiling.
You've had this conversation many a time, but let's hear your story on this.
Oh, so many parallels, it's funny. So I didn't realise that I was becoming an engineer until I found myself working in engineering. When I looked around, I thought, oh right, that's what it is. No, I mean honestly, I went through school, chose A-levels that were very much sort of I guess science-based, but my love was geography. I love the people and the places and the politics and the economics and all that piece around here, how society works. And so I did a geography degree and then fell into a role in transport planning, not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life, and with the intention really of having a bit of a think and a bit of a talking to myself moment at some point about what I really wanted to do. And then you see the potential, then you see what the engineering community is really all about, and it suddenly it's almost by, I don't know if it's coincidence or fate or whatever, but you sort of find something that gives you purpose and you go, wow, hang on a minute, because I've got different skills, because I've come at this from a different angle, because I haven't spent all my time following exactly the same track, just as you were saying, it's a strength. because
Yeah,
actually you arrive with a different outlook, and I think that's to be celebrated. I mean, I'm a broken record on this subject in many circles, in the fact it really frustrates me that when we go out searching, you know, I don't know, STEM type engagement and so on, and we go and we focus on the people who already seem to be self-selecting towards an engineering path. Wait a minute, just because they didn't pick it doesn't mean they can't do it. It means they haven't figured out yet that that's something that is of interest, and that to me is a massive gap, an opportunity, I suppose, in terms of the way that we could change the game in terms of bringing far more people towards us.
Yeah, and we're very much trying to do that, Rachel, at Women's Engineering Society, through our cluster events, really looking at the whole of the engineering economy and making sure women can engage in it from whatever pathway they come in, whether they're coming in later, whether they've come, whether they're switching industries, whether they're returning, whether they want to do additional courses. So we're really focusing on that because I think there's a massive untapped talent market out there. Definitely. And I have to say, when I was going around with my son, looking at doing university taster courses, I sat in on a sample land economics lecture. And at the time I was working in energy, and I was like, this degree is basically my job in engineering.
Yeah.
Not that I'm an engineer either, but it is that breadth that those subjects give you, the economics and the geography, are just so needed. You know, that's the stuff that makes engineering, the technical engineering work. So really interesting. Becky, did you want to come in there?
I was going to say, like, we had an event last year at Brooklands Museum about automotive and motorsport, and it was really interesting. I was really expecting a lot of university students and like students doing their A levels that are already looking at engineering. We actually had quite a few people come that were in kind of, I guess, adjacent to engineering career paths that really wanted to switch, and it was just really interesting to get to speak to them. And I don't think you realise how many people are interested in changing, or like their skills could apply to it.
Don't know. Need that those events to showcase what's out there in terms of where they could end up, and then what support's available to help them get into it. No, so good. And yeah, the Brooklands Museum event was great. So I'm just going to sort of bring this more to a close to really sort of focus on legacy from both of you, which you know, it would be really good to dig into where you think you might like to leave legacy. So Rachel, perhaps we can start with you. What one key piece of advice would you give to early career engineers? And maybe I was going to ask you a question earlier to build on, you know, that perhaps what are the myths around you as a senior leader that you wish you could kind of explode to help those the people in early careers show up and just come with maybe those more candid suggestions and to feel confident? What's your piece of advice to those early career engineers?
Well, knowing me as you do, I will never have just one piece of advice, but I will try to be brief. So I'm going to answer that final bit first, actually, that thing around, you know, I guess myths to do with whether it's me or, you know, people in senior roles and so on. To me, all of this comes back to one big thing, which is we're all just people.
Yeah.
I'm just a person. We're all just people. Everybody has a valid point of view. Everybody is allowed an opinion. And actually, you know, the only person you're sort of hurting by not speaking up and so on, it's probably you, if you see what I mean. So just seeing everybody as, you know, regardless of whether they're in senior roles or more junior roles, genuinely just seeing them as people who actually, you know, definitely have something to offer is, to me, key. In terms of I guess the first bit of the question, in terms of, I guess, advice, and I can't possibly do just one piece of advice. I'm going to do, let me do three really brief ones because it's my go-to list each time I get asked a question like this. So really quickly, first piece, definitely, that I know I have just benefited from massively over the years, and there is no cheat for this. There is no shortcut. It's around building a network. It's about getting engaged and having faith that if you put yourself out there a little bit, no matter how scary it is, you will be repaid in time as, you know, good people rise with you. You get to know people, people see you and that kind of thing. And even if you're terrified about the first time of joining in with that stuff, actually, as we were saying a few minutes ago, everybody else is scared too. It's fine. So build your network, absolutely. Second one, get qualified, because it's literally your own personal armor. My first boss always used to say that to me, and all of us, you know, as he was mentoring us through the early stages of our careers. Just get qualified, because you carry it with you. If everything else goes wrong, you've still got that to fall back on. And the final one, really quickly, is actually, it kind of joins together a lot of this conversation, really. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Figure out what you're good at, what you love, what gives you that sort of sense of purpose where you can make that difference that I know all these, you know, young engineers are so keen to create, just as I am still. Figure out where that point all joins together and just put that into whatever you're doing now. Don't wait for the next project. Don't feel you have to change organization. Don't wait for it to be perfect circumstance. Find a little way to be creative and put a little piece of that into what you're doing now, because then you never know what doors are going to open, and you don't always have to open the doors. Other people will see it and go, hang on a minute, I really like the way you did that. Could you come and do that over here or over there? And somehow, you, again, it's about that trust point again, just to have some faith that it'll come good, it'll be worth it. And also, in the meantime, you're doing more of what you love.
Brilliant. Good. Thank you, Rachel. Super useful. Becky, I don't know if you want to either give some pieces of advice that you've learnt so far, or whether you've got some asks of what engineering leaders should bring in terms of fresh perspectives or ideas to help them stay adaptable and relevant. I don't mind which one of those, whether you want to build on what Rachel said or pick something new.
I think what Rachel said about building a network, I really underestimated like how important that was. And honestly, Wes has been like such a key part of being able to do that. Like whether it's like having engineers and friends to like support you through like a tough time at work, or like at the Wes events, like the amount of interesting people I've spoken to and added on LinkedIn, and maybe it hasn't led to anything, but you never know where it could in the future. Yeah, I guess that would be my advice. And also the advice that I was given about just like say yes to every opportunity, because you just never know where it will lead you.
So good, so good. And I echo that. I you know, networking is just such a useful thing to have, and like you say, you never know when you need to reach in for a mentor or some advice. You can just you know, you'll quite often find that in a network of people you've already met. So great stuff, both. So just to finish up, you've both been amazing advocates for other women in engineering. If you could leave one lasting impact on the engineering profession, what would it be? And maybe Becky, we come to you first.
I think, like we were saying earlier, if my legacy could be that engineering is just a bit more inclusive to people from that have done like non-standard paths into engineering, especially women, if they've maybe not had the opportunity or didn't know about going into engineering to start with, and have kind of come into it later. I think, yeah, leaving it more open to that.
So good, so valuable. Rachel?
First of all, I completely agree. Yeah, absolutely. I guess my my first thought around that is less around the women in engineering piece and more about the role of engineering in society more generally. For me, legacy wise, it's all about carrying on with turning the enormous tanker of climate action around from the point of view of engineers across the board. So the tangled web of everything to do with decarbonising everything, becoming more resilient to the changes that definitely are already happening and lie ahead, and also the natural world impacts and the ability to use, you know, nature in a restorative sense to really help with all the other pieces as well, and to kind of see that it's going to need a lot of compromise, but actually that can be done, to have the engineering community see and start to articulate much more clearly that actually there are loads of good ideas that we could just get on with, that would be, yeah, for me. I mean, that I think it's a, you know, it's more than one life's work, that one, but
Yeah.
we're on the way. Keep going. That's what we have to do.
Keep going. And on that note, we do have another INWED talk that is focused on climate emergency. So very excited for that one. We've got two WES friends who have independently gone on the homeward bound journey to Antarctica, and they will be in conversation. So that should be a really lovely one to look forward to. But thank you both. It's been really lovely to bring you together. Hopefully now you'll remain part of each other's network.
Of course.
And thank you so much for sharing everything you have so far.